a nice angle actually. Whose is this?
Okay, everyone. Hello, sorry for the delay. I'm Mariah. I'm going to be your chair for this round. Yes, so welcome to round 7. Do you need to say?
Yes, I don't know the situation. No problem. Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The motion for today is this House supports France's exit from West Africa. Representing the proposition, we have the team from Tanzania, and on the opposition, we have the team from Portugal. Each speaker will have 8 minutes to deliver their speech. The first and last minute of each speech is considered protected time, during which points of information may not be offered. The judges will signal the end of the protected time at the 1 minute mark, after which POIs can be offered, and will signal the return to protected time at the 7 minute mark. At the 8 minute mark, they will use a double clap or ding to signal the end of the speech. Additionally, there will be 3 claps or dings at 8:15, and the judges will stop listening at 8:30. Best of luck to both teams. I now hand over the floor to Jacob.
Good luck, everybody.
So we're going to be first in the proposition to the debate. Here.
speech in 3, 2, 1. The legacy of colonization has finally caught up with France, where former French colonies that have been forever subjugated by French rule have decided enough is enough. Finally, I'm going to do 3 things for you today. The first thing I'm going to do is frame this debate. Second, I'm going to offer you some characterization and principle justification for side proposition. And finally, I'm going to offer you arguments for detailed stakeholder analysis. Moving on to my first burden. Panel, we heard that this debate is about the nature of France's delineating involvement in West African affairs and how that justifies their exit from that region. Opposition then must defend a world where France stays in West Africa, even with backlash from current West African states. They must defend a world where France continues to have military bases. They continue to exact economic exploitation over that region. That is their burden. Allow me then to move on to some of the characterizations that will be principal in understanding how this debate goes. The first thing that we must understand is the nature of France's involvement in West Africa, right? We know that this first nature is a very exploitative one, right? What do we mean by this? One, look how France took advantage of infant former colonies to sign a pact that was literally called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization to pay colonial tax, right? You think that they would have at least been smart enough to come up with a name to cover their track. But the truth of the matter is, they took advantage of the very low agency that African countries had right after independence, while they were young and desperate, to cement their neocolonialism position, which has been characterized by one, the undermining of political determination, right? We see this when we have an instance where any emerging leader that is anti-France is either assassinated or killed. It is not surprising then that there are a number of coups in the region, in these countries which are mostly funded by France. But the second neo-colonialist position is also cemented by the economic oversight that France exacts over these countries, right? We see this when 14 African countries have 80% of their revenue stored in the French Reserve Bank, right? But finally, we think this neo-colonialist position is cemented at the point where we see the cultural domination that goes on within the states, right? We see how, for instance, French dictated that the language of instruction will be in French and etc. Now let me give you a proper systematic look on how French truly maintain their influence within this region, right? We think this looks like in a number of ways. One, we think they systematically put people in power. They have puppet leaders, right? Who would offer them conditional support in exchange for money and resources in order for them to be able to maintain control of the colonies. But secondly, we see this at the point where France funds the militaries of these countries and then are able to dictate agendas of who to target and what not. Essentially then, France is able to run their police state from the safety of the European mainland. But the second area of characterization, right? The second area of characterization is on how France's exit is a push rather than a voluntary exit. We tell you that France wants to remain in these countries because of the benefits that it's gotten from unfair slanted trade relationships with them, where it exploits their natural resources for next to nothing. We see this, for example, when France was trading Burkina Faso's uranium for $8, when the going rate to the market is hundreds of dollars, right? We tell you that this legacy of colonization is exactly what we do not want to see on-site government, right? Now allow me to move on to the principal justifications that we have on our side of the house. We tell you that then, we need to understand that France was actually supposed to leave a long time ago, right? Because I posit this to you, what other colonialist power still exacts their hopes in the African continent to the extent that France does, right? Therefore, we tell you that the concept of anti-colonialism in and of itself is that no country should have control over another through bullying, pillaging, and theft, right? Because when you tax governments that have 500 years of colonization, make no mistake, that is theft, right? Therefore, there's 2 layers of principal justification that are going to come from outside governments. The first being on independence, right? We tell you that we're pushing for a true unequivocal independence, where West African states have a complete detachment from France, but secondly, one of autonomy, where they're able to have agency over their own processes and governance, right? In principle, we tell you that it is unjustified for one nation to dictate the affairs of another. Why then should we prioritize the independence and autonomy as principles over opposition's counterfaction, which will most likely be one of mutualism or assistance, right? This priority analysis has 2 layers. One, we tell you that these independence and autonomy are rights that every nation is entitled to, right? But secondly, we tell you that they form the basic tenets of nationhood that are vital to stability and good governance. At the point where a nation can't determine its own fate, we think that it's unlikely for it to have stability and unlikely for it to have good governance, right? Now that I've done that, I'm going to move to some of the arguments. So what are the arguments that we're going to receive from side government? So we're going to forward 4 arguments for you today. The first being on economic independence, the second being on cultural independence, and my second speaker is going to forward 2 more arguments which are going to be on political independence and resource independence, right? So moving on to my first argument of economic independence. The premise of this argument is that France has not allowed these countries to have agency over major economic tools, right? We think that they have done this by grabbing a hold of strategic economic factors, and this is how it's played out on their side of the house. We see this when France needs currencies of more than 14 African countries through the CFA franc, which gives them undue control of something as fundamental as currency, right? We see this when 80% of the countries have their foreign reserves put in the central bank of France, right? This makes France benefit 500 billion in the interest of these monies on top of the colonial tax that they already paid. But we also see this when France then distributes these funds to these countries at loans at market interest, further subjugating these countries. That is to say, even if these countries wanted to access the money that they themselves placed in France, they would still have to access it at an interest rate, and even then only be able to access only 20% of that money. So what will economic independence then look like on our side of the world? We think economic independence will look like countries having full control of making their currencies. This will give them the agencies to control the competitiveness of their countries through the merits of market indicators and show the true value of the economy. We think also economic independence will look like countries having the autonomy to choose where the foreign reserves are stored and exactly how they invest in. What are the impacts then? 3 impacts that we receive from side government. The first impact is how, on principle, countries should have the TR to control their own destiny without the supervision of former colonial masters, right? We think this speaks to the unfettered autonomy and independence that we principally justified at the beginning of our speech. But secondly, we say that even if the economies of these countries suffer in the short term, the long-term benefits of this is that these countries are able to gain the invaluable experience of managing their own economic aspects without supervision from France, and finally they get a better investment in the long term, right? A stakeholder analysis then of who is the prime most vulnerable stakeholder in this debate. One, we take the prime most vulnerable stakeholders in the West African nation, the citizens. And why should we care about this, right? We should care about this one, issue of justice, right? Because we think that these West African nations have had a long history of being oppressed. But secondly, an issue of principle, because we feel that they have a right to independence and autonomy. But even if we're not to care about justice and principle, on the simple issue of numbers, we show that there are 167 million people in Francophone nations, right? We would prioritize 167 million people in Francophone Africa over 67 million people in French. The impact of this stakeholder analysis then is that side opposition must oppose it on 3 fronts: on a principle on justice, on principle, and on magnitude. At the point where they fail to do so, they concede that we actually cater for the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate. Allow me, before I move on, I'll take the point.
So how does changing their currency to a weaker one that is not affiliated to euro such as strong currency is beneficial for these countries?
See, the problem is that you have already internalized that African currency is a weaker currency. Which is the reason that African currency is even perceived as weak is because it's one, it is not printed in African states, but secondly, they don't even have control over how much of their own reserves they're able to access. At the point where side government is the only one that is able to achieve both of these 2 things, we're able to strengthen African currency on our side. Thank you. Moving on to the second argument of cultural independence. The premise is that African culture has been trivialized by legacy of colonization because of the fact that assimilation was something that the French pushed as a method of colonial control. This looks like African countries, Africans aspiring for articles of French culture. It looks like a constant bombardment of French advertisements. It looks like many young Africans leaving their countries in pursuit of France, right? But what does cultural independence then look like on our side of the world? We think it looks like a cultural revolution that strips France's undue influence of these countries. It looks like a return of the cultural artifacts that was stolen by France during colonialism. What are the impacts of this? And the impacts is one, a restoration of national pride in things that are African, and secondly, a prioritization of national narratives that help to shape the ideas of their countries. Panel, be clear on our priorities. The lives of West Africans, the prosperity of their economies, and the conditions of their autonomy are in your hands. That's why you should vote proposition. Thank you.
Great. We thank the speakers for the speech. And if there's a red vote, we're going to call the first speaker of opposition. Here,
Just so I know who's going to keep track of that. I'll begin my speech shortly.
3, 2, 1. Panel, France is the uniting force in these West African countries, promoting safety, stability, and economic growth, at least much more than these authoritarian regimes who are steadily grabbing more and more land into their sphere of influence. This debate is about preventing political instability, terrorist insurgencies, and the deaths caused by all of these aforementioned issues. And proud to oppose. Well, how will I organize my speech? First, I'll give some pieces of setup, and then followed by some rebuttals to proposition's case, and I'll present our first constructive arguments about how France's exit leads to worse regime for West African countries. And well, the setup. What do these West African countries look like? They're countries that are developing countries with a lot of potential and also have a large demographic growth. Their environment is also present with a lot of terrorist groups. They're also vulnerable countries with vulnerable economies and security. And they also have unstable economies and governments that rely on France, and that will be addressed in our second argument. Okay, and what do nations that have interest in Africa look like? Well, France, for example, is one of them, while other superpowers like China and Russia aim to assist these countries in exchange for resources, labor force, influence, and control over these countries. And well, some pieces of rebuttal. Sorry. Well, they've stated about there are no other colonial powers in Africa and how France is the only one, the major villain of this, but we don't think that is true. There exist many other colonial powers in Africa to this day, and also colonial powers that are growing every single day in Africa, such as China and such as Russia, who invest in public infrastructure inside these countries just so that the country is in debt for them, and so are being controlled by France. And also they talk about a case that is built upon freedom and independence. And well, Mali, for example, is one of these countries that had this independence, but what happened afterwards, what happened after that independence was that it was taken over by a major oppressive dictatorship that restrains human rights and is just as oppressive as many other dictatorships in the past. And well, now I'll be going to our first constructive argument. How France's exit leads to worse regime for the West African countries. And so what are we trying to say? With this argument, we will prove how France's exit actually causes more harm than good to the country's population, political regime, and economy. Reason one. Why is this true? Reason one, the rise of dictatorships. Well, authoritarian regimes in West Africa would rise due to a power vacuum that occurs once France would leave these African countries. And that is very, very harmful. And how does this happen? Well, the power vacuum that is created by France's exit leaves space for dictators to get into power. And there are some examples of this in the real world. As I've stated, as soon as France left Mali, a dictatorship was started. Once an authoritarian regime was implemented, even more harm happened. For example, the LGBT, especially for the most vulnerable groups. Okay? For example, being part of the LGBTQ community was criminalized in the country. You can be actually thrown into jail or even worse if you are part of this community. So a group that's already vulnerable is even more targeted. Another example is not directly related to France, but when the USA took their military out of Afghanistan in 2021, a dictatorship by the Taliban, a terrorist group, took over the country, but it only made problems worse. The country is closed to the public, so it's almost impossible to give international aid, and moreover, the President of the United States, women had lost their rights that they had been fighting for in that country. And also, what does this lead to? This causes even more harm for the population, especially vulnerable groups like women and the LGBTQ community. And reason two, other countries will replace France's role. Nations like Russia and China are increasing their domain over Africa. So if they notice an opening in these Western African countries, they will try to have some sort of control over these countries. And also, the reason three is how France currently has a strong military influence over West Africa, and how they have multiple military bases set up in these countries. They say that as something bad. Well, an example, let's do a little illustration. An example of USA in Afghanistan. With their military base, they prevented terrorist groups from actually rising. And why is the French military the best to help these countries? Well, French troops have a better practice with better methodologies in comparison to other troops, besides often having support from big organizations like UN. France has the resources and to invest in this military and security in these countries. And also the French troops are familiar with the territory, so they already have developed tactics, strategies, plans to deal with conflicts in these regions. And also comparatively, now why is it better than, for example, Russian troops that would take over? Well, Russia's already dealing with huge conflicts in Ukraine, for example, and they have less soldiers and resources to actually invest in protecting these countries from these terrorist groups. And also, groups like Wagner Group that align themselves with Russia, however, are mercenaries. So these armies don't follow the law and do not care about actual, and they will commit atrocities towards citizens in their cities, as they do not care about them at all. And well, why is it better also than Chinese troops? Well, Chinese troops aren't as developed as the French ones. French troops have trained and experienced counter-terrorist groups and more developed methodologies, and besides being supported from the UN. And even if none of this was true, it is exclusive to French troops that they are familiar with the area. This means that no other nation has knowledge about those areas like France does. A change in the military would mean a whole other group would have to adapt to these regions throughout this time. Terrorist groups have easier access to these regions as other troops would still adapting to these locations. I would say here, why?
Yes. At the point where it's the fact that France forced the countries to sign the pact for the continuation of colonization after colonization. How do you account for the reverse of that?
Could you repeat the last part?
Okay, how do you account for the pact for the continuation of colonization that France forced newly formed countries in Africa to sign?
Well, okay, we'll be addressing that in our second argument through my second speaker. But okay, continuing with the speech. Also, why does China have an interest in West Africa in the first place? Well, these nations have to outsource the labor force and still developing and industrializing countries in Africa. Africa is also an interesting place for natural resources, especially Sahel, gold, phosphate, aquifers, petroleum. And it also has a large demographic boom and also cheap labor force, something that most of these developed countries can take advantage of. And why does China need and want these labor forces? Well, China has lost these labor forces, and their main industry is manufacturing, and they don't have the labor forces to actually do it, so they need to outsource it from these other countries. And how do they do this? China, for example, uses the debt strategy. They invest in different sectors for these countries, in infrastructures, in much other things, and so the country cannot repay them. And so China forgives their debt in search of, for example, owning a part of their land or having control over the economy or the infrastructure of the country. And well, in the end, China compensates the interest rates by making these countries hold them. And also, second, authoritarian regimes by these foreign nations, a political regime that is implemented by China, and that defends our authoritarian values. Now, these nations are also showing a political side since these values don't usually respect the African nation's culture. And why does it matter more than other arguments? Why is China with the regime worse than France? Ideas are less inclined to protect human rights. Example, fast fashion, like Shein and Taylor workers who get paid below minimum wage, 14 hours daily work, using Uyghurs in concentration camps. Horrible living conditions. These are the ideals of China. And also, more influence of anti-democratic countries. This workforce is even more exploited inside of the house, so the workers have worse conditions. This proves that France leaving this country will lead to even worse conditions for population in this country, and that Chinese neoliberalism will take place. That's why I was so proud to oppose.
Thank you for this speech. We call upon, if everyone's ready, the second speaker of the presentation. Here.
All the examples that team opposition have perpetrated are like this. This is a false narrative. France do not represent safety and stability. In fact, they represent the opposite of that. Why do I say this? In my first speaker, he came here and told you the nature of the French colonization in West Africa, that whenever presidents who are anti-France rise to the government, what happens is France supports coup. France enact their military bases to fight against this president by funding military coups to go against them, which creates political instability and unsafety in the country. Then they talk about economical safety and regime. Also, this is a false narrative to the point that these African nations are paying a colonial tax. Ladies and gentlemen, how is that effective for the economy? At the point where they were made to sign a pact that is literally titled Continuation of Colonial Legacy. How is that helpful for the economic regime? We tell you those are false narratives that they're portraying. They tell us that Africa, its economy is unstable, is unsafe, and therefore we need to rely on France. That is a false narrative, ladies and gentlemen. Cameroon is the 5th largest producer of cocoa. It is the largest producer in the whole Africa of timber. Such a country should have been the richest country in the likes of UK, the likes of USA, but it's still not rich, and it's still being under France. Why is that? Because the reason they were not able to be as rich as UK, as rich as USA, is because France has been stealing their resources. France has been undermining the economical persuasions and power, and this is why, till date, countries like Cameroon have failed to break out of their cycle of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, they did not oppose us on the principle of independency and autonomy. They are saying that West African states cannot, govern themselves, and we have two responses to this. This is more due to France's influence, just like I've explained, where they are stealing their resources, where they are buying the uranium at $2 instead of buying it at the market cap. We tell you that countries like Burkina Faso are anti-France and they are doing pretty well for themselves because they are no longer wanting to subdue themselves to political powers of France. I would like to address the arguments of rise of dictatorship. We tell you that France are the ones that are supporting a nature of dictatorship. We tell you people like Paul Biya are dictators. Paul Biya, who is a president of Cameroon, these are dictators that are personally supported by France. We tell you that what they're supporting is replacing one dictator for another dictator, ladies and gentlemen. Even if France were to leave and a power gap will still come in there, they say that dictators will come in and take over. That's a false narrative because what will happen is locals will come and take over their country, and we both know that locals want the best for their government. How can you say that an outsider wants the best thing from an insider? How can an American want the best thing for Tanzania? That's a false narrative, ladies and gentlemen. They came here, we asked them to justify French military. They justified French military by doing one thing. They say that they're familiar with the area. We tell you that this is a lie because there is no way French military can be familiar with the area than the local troops, than the local soldiers who grew up in those neighborhoods, who lived their whole lives there. Yet some French military who are sent there know the area more than the local troops. We tell you that this is a lie. But we also tell you 3 things that the French military represent. French military represents coup d'etats that are supported by the French government. They represent a political cage because this French military are essentially prison guards against the West African and all the countries. But also we tell you that side opposition supports exploitation by making it look like investment. Imagine a country paying colonial tax and they still claim that's a form of investment, and we think this is an absurd to keep on allowing this nature of oppression. I'd like to continue with my argument of political independence. The argument here is France has had an incentive to place corrupt political stooge in power who can ensure that France continues to benefit from its oversight. For example, Paul Biya of Cameroon is a prime example of how France is completely happy to put leaders that are the detrimental of their own population. This is in turn disadvantages the local people from enjoying good governance, from enjoying their independence and autonomy, which is a principle of side proposition that they are not engaged in, but it also perpetrates corruption. Like I've shown you how Cameroon is the 5th largest producer of cocoa and timber, yet they are poor. We want to tell you that we want political independence. How does political independence look in our house? It looks like former African countries having the right to develop other political relationships for a multi-popular world. We tell you it is the ability to take loans from other nations other than France and form strong bonds with multiple countries such as China and resources under these countries like uranium, gold, cocoa are disproportionately mismanaged because what France do is they have a first right of refusal. So that means the first right of refusal for all resources that are discovered and for all resources yet to be discovered. So even if they will discover a gold mine 20 years later, France still has the first refusal to only take, France has the ability to take their resources only themselves and no other African country or no other European country. In other words, West Africa cannot sell their resources to any other country but to France. Not only that, they have to sell at the prices that France are dictating, ladies and gentlemen. West Africa don't have the ability to enjoy their resources because they don't even have the right to their own resources that are produced in their own country. And we think that this whole idea is completely absurd. Now, what are the impacts of resource mismanagement? We tell you that because of this, West Africa will always be at the short side of everything. They'll always be poor. They'll never be able to accept the cycle of poverty. They'll never be able to escape they'll never be able to attain true freedom, true independence, and that is something that is completely unfair. And as a principle, it is a principle right for every African country to be independent, to be autonomous, ladies and gentlemen, and there is no justification in the world that would justify us Africans being oppressed in such a nature. We tell you that is a vulgar oppression, not even a neo-colonization, that is a pure colonization at its best, because what happens is whenever West Africa misbehaves, whenever West Africa retaliates against France, France has the ability to punish them. How does this look like? They stop giving them currency. How does this look like? It takes all their resources. How does it look like? It makes their lives a literal living hell. And we tell you that this is something that is preposterous. The fact that we've been debating against it, this is a human rights violation. This is all that stands wrong with the world. And in fact, if anybody supports this, then they really need to assess their moral values. Thank you.
Thank you for the speech. We call for the second speaker of the opposition.
Now, they say that our arguments are irrelevant if they are both
Well, that is not true because we show how France is good and is better than those countries. So in our arguments, we're showing how France is good and how other countries, for example, China, is worse. So it's just a comparative. Now, they talk a lot about the dictators of France, and they say how bad they are. That is actually not, but they fail to explain how on their side there are also dictators and how they will deal with that. And it doesn't matter as much as because these French dictators that they claim at least develop these countries, give money from France to these countries, help their development, have their economic development, some sort of profit there. Even if it matters, we have shown how there are dictators on both sides and how on our side we assure this economic development. Antique, why not?
Yes. Do you morally condemn, do you morally abhor the colonial tax imposed by France on Francophone countries that amounts to $500 billion annually in an already poor region?
Okay, so we show you how there are dictators on both sides. So that's not relevant. On your side, you're not preventing these dictators from coming. This colonialism from other countries of coming to these African countries. So you don't show how you actually have a better solution for that. Now, moving on to our second constructive argument, how West African countries rely on France. So what we're trying to say, countries in West Africa rely on France for a lot of things like economic security, among others. So without France, these countries will find hard to continue and work on these sectors because they do it by having France's support. Now, a little bit of characterization of this argument. So these countries have relied on France for a long time, and now depend on depend on France to help on these things. Now, reason why this is true. First, security. France has a good military that can help making these countries more secure from the invasion of others, as we have already proven our first argument. This military is irreplaceable, and by France's exit, this country's security is at risk, and their citizens' security is at risk. Now, reason number two, they say that France doesn't help their economy. Well, then reason number two, we show about investment and trade. French companies invest in various sectors, mining, telecommunications, agriculture. These investments create jobs, improve infrastructures, and boost local communities. They are giving these people jobs. Now, reason number two why this is true, economic partnership agreements. West African countries have signed EPAs with the European Union, which provide preferential access to European markets. These agreements reduce or eliminate tariffs on a wide range of goods, making it easier and more profitable for Western African countries to export for Europe. So France is helping these countries have better exportation, helping them develop their economy. European countries also feel safer trading with them because they have the security that are also trading with France, which creates security, and it's better for the European countries because with the help of France, they know that it's a safe agreement. I'll talk about later. Now, reason number 4 makes it true, development projects. France funds numerous development projects in these areas that help healthcare, people access to hospitals, education, access to schools, infrastructures, incredibly beneficial for the local population that without the French help, this population wouldn't have access to this. That's why France is so important for this population. Now, reason number 5 why this is true. Humanitarian aid. France provides humanitarian aid, including food, medical supplies, water, and disaster relief in times of crisis, helping to mitigate the impact of conflicts and natural disasters. Since they help their economy and also make some profit with that, they have that incentive to help these countries when they are having a crisis, when they are having problems, when they are going through some sort of thing that they need help.
Point.
Reason number 6 why this is true. The value of the currency will lose its value since it's no longer affiliated to euro. So French presence there also helps them having a better currency that can help this country's economy better. I'll take your view right now.
Yes. If you don't condemn the tax, how then do you account for the economical backlash that a significant amount of money leaving the countries will have for the already poor population of West Africans?
On our side, we ensure that at least these people have jobs, that these people have access to healthcare, that these people have access to food. So we actually show how we are helping them. We are still helping the population on our side, and we are helping the population better than your side because you didn't know how you will help the population. Okay, now, what does this lead to? What's the impact of our second argument? This argument proves, first, how these countries will like France. For France to exit these countries, we mean that all these benefits that I just mentioned wouldn't exist. So in the proposition side, these countries wouldn't have these benefits. They wouldn't have this help from France to development and to help them in crisis, among other things. And now, moving on to the economy, the effects that this would have in the population. Since, as I showed you in this argument, France helps their population finding jobs. This, when France leaves these countries, the economy would be less good because created, everything that France created, everything that France invested there wouldn't work because France wouldn't help them and wouldn't have any incentivized to actually help the people. Moreover, all of these benefits we presented to you are worse on their side of the house. Without France, the humanitarian aid, for example, that is something that is very significant for the debate, is much worse on their side. Since West African countries don't have the resources to invest on these things by themselves, even though they're important for citizens. So that's why they need France's help. Notice how relying on France isn't bad. It is exactly France who gives them, to these countries, the chance of economical growth. Why does this matter? This is important because it shows that our side enables economic growth, which promotes the development of these countries. Our side promotes their development, helps their development. It also shows how the quality of life of citizens is better in our side. We show how this investment from France can help the citizens, and that's why I am so proud to oppose this motion.
Great. Thank you for the speech. And if everyone's ready to follow on the third tier of the proposition. Whenever you're ready.
My order? Okay. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Here's how we solve the backlash of France's exit. Opposition claimed that instability, tension, and conflict will erupt as a result of France's exit. Here's our response. We think that there is more instability at the point when France exerts France exacts military and economic control. Okay. Secondly, is that even if there is instability, we prefer it in. Even if there is instability, we prefer it in our principle. Another thing is that they didn't really oppose our principal justification on independence and autonomy, and didn't oppose or engage on our stakeholder analysis. And lastly, no engagement on our arguments on France exit and on how France exits. France exit translates to cultural independence. Two things that I'll be doing in this debate. I'll flash out the strategic flaws that were present in the fragile case that was presented by side opposition, and secondly, I will show a flash analysis on how exactly, as side opposition and side government, we stand for the independence and autonomy of West African countries. Moving on to the strategic flaws. First thing is that there was lack of engagement on the aspect of our bush premise. We asked side opposition 2 bush premise, which were first off is justify why France should stay in West African countries, and secondly is to justify why exactly France should continue its economic exploitation and military intervention, which they failed to justify and make an analysis of throughout this debate. Another thing is that there was a lack of engagement in the justification on the POI that we gave. They talked about how exactly, we asked them how do you account for the $500 billion US that is being exploited, that is being drained from these West African countries that are coerced into using colonial franc currency. They failed to engage in that. And another thing is that they failed to have immersive clarity on the whole issue of the presence of dictators in the West African region and the Sahel region. They painted a false stance claiming that dictators exist on both sides. Something that I'll clarify something I'll clarify later on in my speech. Moving on to my analysis of my classes. Two questions that we should ask ourselves in this debate. First one, in adjudicating this debate. First one is, does France have an obligation to leave West African countries and Africa in general? And second one is, has West Africa truly been free owing to France's colonial press? Starting with the first claim. France neo-colonial economic rejected. France neo-colonial economic policies and military interventions in West African countries perpetuate dependency and exploitation. How is that solved? We can see this as stated by my first and second speaker on the very brink an instance where Western African countries were supposedly decolonized by their French colonizer. France signed a pact that was actually explicitly termed as the continuation of colonial reign in the France was. Another thing is that we see there is continued exploitation by France itself in the aspect where West African countries do not actually even have agency over their own economic tools, over their own currency, over their own resources. Whereas France continues to drain $500 billion annually from these economies, further worsening the rates of poverty and unemployment in these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, side opposition fails. Ladies and gentlemen, side opposition fails aggressively in this debate when they bring several fraudulent cases and claims to the table. First off is on the aspect of other colonial powers filling in the gap that France has left upon its exit. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand that this debate is primarily and principally focused and highlighted upon France's exit, and not necessarily who or what fills in the gap that they did. Another thing is that even if these powers are incentivized to fill in the gap that France will leave, ladies and gentlemen, the actual sense is that they will not really have the same amount of influence as France has had. Remember, France has had its contemporary influence majorly because what makes it exclusive is because it had past colonial ties with it. Therefore, even if there were to be other powers that would be incentivized, they wouldn't really reach to that particular brink or extent. Another thing is that these powers that side opposition claims will come and fill in the supposed gap that was left by France will actually not be exploited. Ladies and gentlemen, this is seen in Burkina Faso, whereas their nationalist leader, who was a general, was actually created economic ties with countries such as Russia, with countries such as China, which help in especially its economic sector such as mining. Right now, Burkina Faso is able to sell its own gold, to sell its own diamond through the partnership that it's had with Russia and China, something that was not present when France had occupied and had control of them. Another false claim is on the authoritarian regimes. They talked about how dictators, they talked about through France's exit, there will be a rise of dictators who will keep on pushing for the violation of human rights, violation of human rights within the West African countries, and also worsen the economic status of these countries. This is actually not true. And in fact, it is the whole claim that they made on the whole aspect of having dictators on both sides is not true. Dictators only exist in their sides. In our sides, we have a brighter world where we have nationalist leaders who actually stand for the African individuals, the majority of African individuals who deserve their freedom, deserve their independence, deserve their autonomy. In our side, we have nationalist leaders who actually help to improve the economies of these impoverished West African countries. We have African nationalist leaders who actually promote and reinforce the human rights and the privileges that West African individuals have been stolen and robbed by France itself. Another thing is that they come here claiming that there will be an invasion, as in upon exit of France, other terrorist groups who intrude these countries and leave them helpless and destroy their economies. This is actually not true. We have to understand that invasion exists in their side exclusively, whereas we have French troops who are present in that region playing the Trojan horse narrative that they're protecting them from the terrorist groups, while in actual sense, they're the ones who initiate these overthrows, they're the ones who initiate these groups, they're the ones who further worsen the human rights abuse in these regions, ladies and gentlemen. Another thing is that in our case, there will be much more better partnerships, whereas we have nationalists who stand at the top of the government, but then in actual sense, but then in reality, promote good governance and engage into economic ties that actually not that are on a fair basis, ladies and gentlemen. They do not account on the whole presence and initiation of the path that had actually continued colonial exploitation in these West African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, vote for a side that has unfettered autonomy and unfettered independence for these West African countries for a better Africa. Thank you. I'm very proud of you.
Thank you for the speech, and if everyone's ready, we'll welcome the third speaker.
Panel, this debate is about how the colonies, the former French colonies in West Africa will be best benefit, in which side will have the better benefits. Senate proposition defense where France leads these colonies and that somehow this world will be better than the status quo. First of all, how will I organize my speech? I will go by the clashes, and I'll, in this clash, show comparable rules and show how a world is better in every single clash of this debate. First of all, the proposition defends independence, economical independence, cultural independence, and so on. And they believe that by France leaving this country, they will reach that. They will reach that. First of all, economically, they can see that if France leaves this country, the former colonies will have to have relationships with other countries in order to sell their products and so on and so forth. But which countries are they selling the products to? They're selling this product and their products and so on, most likely to China and Russia, countries that have interest in buying these products and invest in this country, because notice how if France exits, there'll be no one actually buying their product, their resources, so they'll have enough funds. So they also most likely need loans and so on, which will also be provided by China that has lots of interest in doing those loans in this country because of what the little opposition stated. France invests in loans in this country because they know this country won't be able to repay them, and then what they do, they don't demand the repayment of these loans, but instead they take infrastructure in these countries, and what they do, they use the labor of these countries and treat them in a very bad way, have very bad conditions, and it's also actually mitigates your argument on how this friends living in this country will be better for the people so that they have more freedom to move around. But back to the economy. Notice how now they need China and Russia. They need their help in the economy. So why is there a scenario too bad? Notice how France has a great incentive of having deals, economic deals with this country, because more incentive even than China and Russia, because France has less area, so they have less resources in their own country, so they actually need this, their country in Africa to have resources and to buy these resources, somewhere to buy from. Russia and China, they have lots of other alliances in Asia and so on and so forth. And their area, they have made their countries more natural resources. So France actually buying every time from these colonies, actually provides a stable economy from them. While China and Russia, they will not necessarily need to buy every time from this country and to every time provide these countries money and buy their resources. So notice how these countries now have a lack of they have economical. In your best case, they'll have a lack in economy because they will sell less products to these countries because France is actually buys every time more their resources. So now we've already shown how we provide a more stable economy in our side. But notice how this is your best case scenario. In your worst case scenario, which is much more likely to happen, what happens when France leaves this country? There isn't a person that will save this country and become president and save this country and so on and so forth. Because you forget to engage with the fact that this region, there are lots of terrorist groups that have lots of influence in this country. And not only terrorist groups, but also dictators. They will see France leaving and will see that there's their opportunity with nationalist speech and populism to reach the power and to take control of this country. So notice that in both cases, with France leaving and taking this military arms, these countries will now need, these countries will now most likely be controlled by a dictator or by terrorist groups, which in both cases is much worse for your for this country, because now terrorist groups they don't allow aid to be provided to their they don't like public relations with other countries because they don't want their population to be aided or to be taken care of because they want to control it. They don't engage in so they ruin the economic relations and public relations in general with other countries, so which only worsens your world, your most likely world. While in our world, we still have a good, stable relation with France that provides with money and so on and so forth for the people. So now we already mitigated this economic approach. I'll take your time.
Yes, if West African countries are poor as per your characterization, where are the French dictators that you claim will erupt after France's exit going to get their capital from?
I'll give you an example. Mali. France leaves, and what happens to Mali? The dictator rises and takes the spot. And now, this will directly engage with the second question, which is cultural and human rights and freedom for this country. Notice how this terrorist and this dictator, in your world, they will, for instance, Mali, the dictator banned LGBTQ in the country. How is this human right? How is this freedom for the people in the country? And how are these men actually providing freedom to these people? Notice how this friend, they don't, this dictator can reach the power because friends will allow them. His friends want the country to stay, France wants to have control of the country. And how France has much more better values and will provide freedom to the people and human rights in general and will actually take care of the people. But notice how with terrorist groups, these people, because they have no aid from other countries, they won't allow aid from other countries, and they won't allow and won't have public relations and economy with other countries, it will be also much worse for the population to be in good conditions, to have money, and so it only degrades the state of the population. So that's why we show you how in our world, population is much better provided and has much more freedom and can provide better future than in your side, where you have this type of population where they have this terrorist group and the state taking over. And also, another clash, really important, security. which side provides more security to the population? Well, on the other side, we have the French army, which they can see that it's much better than the Chinese and Russian army. Of course, because they know much more the area, and Russia doesn't have enough, they need to focus on other conflicts in China, and Ukraine, and so on, and so forth. Notice how on our side, this military protects these people from the terrorist groups and from terrorist conflicts. In our side, without French military, it is really mostly unlikely for you to have a solution to deal with the terrorist groups. Because notice how France is the only one stopping them. So, do you think China, China would be fast enough to contain these groups from going to the power? Notice how, for example, in Afghanistan, U.S. left, the military left, and in matters of days, the Taliban already took over the whole country. And when they took over the whole country, all happened, as already stated, that less human rights, less freedom, worse economic state, and in general, less for the country and the whole population in general. So that's how in that world, we at least provide stability for the country. And it's better to be dependent on a good, stable country than on terrorist groups and then on countries that don't actually need or have incentives to have relations with this with the colonies. That's why I'm so proud
Thank you for the speech. Now, for the what will be authorized to finish the paper. Here.
Just 1 minute.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Bang. This debate is about which side makes a better country and benefits these West African countries the most, especially their most vulnerable population. I will organize my speech. I will start by presenting the most important classes of this debate and how we win in which one of them, and then I will do a meta class to show what is the most important class and how we win on that. So, the first class I would like to present is economic development. So, by taking French investment, tension will arise because their French will be taken out with force, so there will be more tension. The French investment will not happen, so these countries will not have as much help to develop their infrastructure, as we have shown throughout our arguments. This can also means taking European Union partnerships, because these countries have the confidence, have the assurance to make partnerships with these African countries, because France is also behind it, and France is part of it. And by taking France from these countries, by taking France from earning some commission or some sort of profit, we are taking their incentive to help these countries develop their economy. And so there will be no investment, there will be no economic development for these countries, which will only make their situation worse. And the only solution for this on proposition side, by taking France from there, is accepting help from other countries like China. And we have shown you how that is bad, because China also has an authoritarian regime that is worse than France, and that's why it is worse on their side to take for economic development, and that's why we win this class, because we assure economical development with France, and France is a better country to do that than otherwise, also because of the connection with the European Union. Now, moving on to the second class, I would like to present human rights and protecting the vulnerable people. So, on our side of the house, we promote creating jobs. We help during crisis, that is natural crisis that these countries usually friends. We also help them defending from wars with the French troops. That is one of the best armies, the most developed armies in the world. So on our side, we show how we can help these most vulnerable people, these vulnerable countries, the people from these countries, to deal with these difficulties. Proposition only assures independence, but fails to explain how actually that independence matters to these people, and how that independence is so much population lost rights and had an even worse life than when the USA was there. So this is another example how taking friends is actually not helping the vulnerable, it's not helping human rights, and only makes it worse. Now, moving on to the third class of this debate, security. So on our side, we saw how we prevent tension, because by not removing friends from there, we're not creating any tension, any civil war, and there won't be this power vacuum that will create a dispute to see who will be the next person on the government. We also show how we can keep security by using the French military that is one of the most developed in the world. And we also show how we can prevent from the operation of other countries like China, for instance. So on our side, we show you how we can ensure this security, how we can achieve a more safe, or at least not a least safe country as they have on their side of the house. Now moving on to method clashing, the most important clash of this debate is human rights and protecting vulnerable people. And that is something that is exclusive to our side. Only our side assures how we can maintain these people's jobs, how we can keep their lives going decent, and how we can help them during crises, during wars, and during the invasion of other countries that will only make these countries worse and these countries suffer more. So that's why we win this clash, and that's how we win this debate, because we assure a better country, a safer country, and we help the vulnerable. Never you follow the
Great. Thank you for the speech, and we're going to hold the proper slide to finish the debate for us.
Every country has the principal right of independence and autonomy, period. There is no justification in this universe that justifies the limitation of the right to a political, cultural, and economical independence and autonomy. And that is something that side opposition have failed to do throughout this debate. Side opposition's biggest case today was what happens when France leaves. They told us rise of dictators, poor economy, lack of safety and stability, and then they said independence of our important economical growth. I'll start by rise of dictators. Finally, throughout on our bench, we've shown you that dictators only exist in France. We've shown you because we've even told you how the French military are the ones that are financing all these civil wars, all these coup d'etats, simply because nationalists rise and defend the French nationalists rise and defend the West African principle. A good example of this is Bardo Juma, the presidential candidate of Nigeria, was assassinated by a French military simply because he stood and fought for the principles of their country, whether be it LGBTQ or not LGBTQ. We tell you that all that they do is not defend the principle of independence and autonomy at all. So let's talk about the issue of poor economy. In our side, we tell you that in our Western African countries, they don't have agency over their resources. They have to seek permission from France before exploiting their own resources. They are bound to only sell to France, even though they are going to sell only for $2 per kilogram of uranium instead of the market cap. Again, France is benefiting $500 billion of interest because 80% of countries' foreign reserves are put in the central banks of France. And then France, with all of
this debate. I'm going to ask you two guys to the room.